Premium distilleries spend a decade building brand mythology around $200 bottles, and a warehouse club private label keeps quietly outperforming them in blind tastings for $40. That is not a rumor. That is what bourbon panels keep returning, flight after flight, and the major distillers have noticed. Industry sentiment appears to be shifting from amused dismissal to something closer to panic, because the math is brutal. A flagship limited release at $180 retail loses, blind, to a Kirkland Signature Pour at $22. And number one on this list might be the single best bourbon dollar you spend all year. The boys in Louisville know exactly which bottle I mean. They wish you didn't. Here is the part the marketing departments will never put on a billboard. The same warehouses, the same mash bills, sometimes the same liquid, wearing different costumes and charging different rents. We are pulling the costumes off. I want to be careful here. None of this is about hating premium bourbon. I have bottles in my own cabinet that cost north of $150, and I think every dollar was earned. This is about the gap. The widening, embarrassing, increasingly indefensible gap between what a bottle costs and what is actually pouring out of it once the wax seal is cracked. And nowhere is that gap more visible than between a $40 Kirkland Pour and a $200 limited release. Brace yourself, because once you see the math, the top shelf never looks the same. Let us start with what Costco actually is in this conversation, because half the audience still thinks Kirkland Signature Bourbon is some mystery juice trucked in from a barn in Indiana. It isn't. Industry observers identify Sazerac as the long-running contract bottler for several Kirkland whiskey expressions, with Barton 1792 in Bardstown reportedly handling a meaningful share of the bourbon-specific SKUs. Other releases have been linked, by trade reporting, to Jim Beam-affiliated stocks and to MGP of Indiana for certain ryes and high rye bourbons. Nobody at Costco confirms a thing. They don't have to. The barcodes on the back match, the cooperage marks line up, and the noses in the glass tell on themselves. The model is almost embarrassingly simple. Costco sells roughly $140 billion of merchandise a year through a membership wall, which means they walk into a distillery's back office with an order so large it rewrites the spreadsheet. They take honest cuts of barrel inventory, skip the marketing lift, skip the influencer junkets, skip the $10 embossed glass, and pass the savings to the member. No stag, no wax dip, no leather presentation case. Just liquid in a bottle with a beige label that looks like it was designed by an accountant in 1987. That beige label is the whole point. It signals nothing, and that is the threat. Think about it. Every premium brand on the top shelf is selling story first, liquid second. The story costs money. The story funds a Rick House mural and a brand ambassador in Tokyo. Costco refuses to fund any of it. So when their buyer walks into Sazerac and asks for honest single-barrel selections at cask, strength, what comes out, is not the watered-down, chill-filtered, marketing-massaged version. It is the bourbon under the makeup. And here is what makes the warehouse club model nearly impossible for a traditional brand to fight. Costco does not need the bourbon line to make a profit. The whole company runs on membership fees, somewhere around $5 billion a year of pure margin from those little plastic cards in your wallet. Everything inside the warehouse, including the bourbon, is essentially run at thin or zero markup as a customer retention tool. So when a major distillery tries to compete on price, they are competing against a buyer who literally does not need the sale to be profitable. That is not a fair fight. That is a business model mismatch dressed up as a price war. Number 5 on the list is the everyday workhorse, Kirkland Signature Small Batch Bourbon. Reportedly bottled by a Sazerac-affiliated facility, sitting at a 103 proof, going for somewhere in the $22 to $26 range for a 1.75-liter handle. Read that again. A handle for under $30. The nose lands with toasted pecan, a faint cherry pit, and that warm cornbread sweetness that tells you the mash bill was treated with respect. The palate is fuller than it has any right to be at this price. There is a soft baking spice middle, a hit of orange peel, and the finish carries a quiet leather note that fades slow rather than slamming a door. Compare that to a Buffalo Trace flagship at the same proof point and similar profile, where the per ounce cost is roughly double. In my assessment, the only thing the more expensive bottle gives you is a more familiar logo, which, last I checked, is not a flavor. Pour this in an old-fashioned and watch what happens. The proof carries through ice without going thin. The orange peel garnish picks up the existing citrus thread already in the bourbon, and the cocktail finishes with the kind of weight you usually have to spend $40 to get. I have served this blind to friends who brag about only drinking single barrel and watch them ask what was in the glass. That happens. It happens often. And every time, the answer is a beige label handle that cost less than a steakhouse appetizer. Number 4 is where the savings start feeling personal. Kirkland Signature. Single barrel bourbon, bottled in the 95 to 103 proof neighborhood, depending on barrel pick, typically priced between $35 and $45 for a 750. Single barrel means no blending to a flavor profile. What is in the barrel is what you drink, with all its quirks. The good ones, and most of the Kirkland barrels I have tasted have been good ones, pour like dark amber and open, with a nose of charred oak, dried fig, and a thread of espresso. The palate carries a chewy texture you almost never find under $50, with notes of butterscotch, scorched sugar, and a black pepper warmth that sits along the back of the tongue for a real beat before letting go. Knob Creek Single Barrel Reserve at 120 proof costs roughly $55 to $65, and in my assessment, lands at a comparable place. Maybe with a slightly different oak signature, but not a 60% better experience. So why the price gap? You are paying for the ceramic stopper and the Beam family lineage on the label. The liquid in the Kirkland glass is doing the same job for $15 fewer. There is a quiet detail about single barrel programs that almost no one talks about. When a major distillery sells single barrel inventory to a private label, they are giving up the ability to dilute that barrel into a larger blend, which means they only do it when they have surplus mature stock to spare. That surplus is exactly where some of the most interesting bourbon hides. Barrels that hit harder than the brand's flagship blending profile and would have been blended down anyway. So the Kirkland Single Barrel, in many cases, is a bottle that the parent brand could not have sold at any price under their own label without first cutting it. Translation. You are sometimes drinking better, fuller, more characterful bourbon under the beige label than under the family crest. Number 3 is the one that genuinely irritates the people in Lynchburg and Tullahoma. Kirkland Signature, 7-year Tennessee bourbon, charcoal mellowed in the Lincoln County style, 90 to 93 proof, retailing in the $25 to $30 range. Industry observers identify the source as a Tennessee distillery, whose name rhymes with a famous label, though Costco does not print it. Here is the inside knowledge. Most premium Tennessee whiskey on the shelf right now is 4 or 5 years old and proudly silent about it. This bottle says 7 on the label. 7 at $28. The nose pours soft banana bread, vanilla custard, a whiff of toasted marshmallow. The palate is rounder than the under 5-year competition, with a maple drizzle in the middle and a finish that holds a gentle cocoa note rather than disappearing into thin alcohol heat. Set this next to Gentleman Jack at roughly $32, or even a single barrel Jack at $50, and the Costco bottle, in my assessment, is doing more work for less money. The age statement alone should be illegal at this price. It isn't. It just is. A small confession. The first time I poured this against a properly poured single barrel Jack, I expected the higher priced bottle to walk away with the round. The single barrel had the more aggressive proof and the louder reputation. But what I got, glass after glass, was the Kirkland coming across as the more balanced, more drinkable, more honest pour. Not bigger, not flashier, just better built. That experience changed how I read the entire under 50 Tennessee shelf, and I suspect it would change yours too. Number 2 is the bottle that quietly humiliates a category. Kirkland Signature, bottled in bond bourbon, 100 proof exactly, 4 years minimum, single distillery, single distilling season. The Federal Bottled in Bond Act of 1897 requirements in full. Retail sits in the $19 to $24 range for a 750 in most regions. $19 for a bonded bourbon. Read that sentence twice and let it land. The nose opens with a clean blast of caramelized brown sugar, a thread of green apple, and that signature bonded grain integrity that tells you nobody cut corners. The palate carries genuine weight. There is a toasted corn sweetness up front, a baking spice middle of cinnamon stick, and a touch of clove, and a finish that runs long with a soft pepper warmth along the back of the tongue. This bottle reportedly comes out of a Barton or Sazerac-aligned bonded warehouse, and in blind flights, I have personally watched it beat bonded expressions in the $40 to $50 tier. Not edge out, beat. The Heaven Hill 7-year bottled in bond at roughly $45 is excellent, and Kirkland's version, in my assessment, is doing 85% of that job for 40% of the money. That is not a value proposition. That is a category problem. The bottled in bond designation is one of the few legally protected promises left on a whiskey label. Single distillery, single distilling season, aged minimum 4 years in a federally bonded warehouse, bottled at 100 proof exactly, no foreign additives. Every single one of those guardrails costs a producer money. Most modern budget bourbons skip them precisely because skipping them is cheaper. The fact that Kirkland chose to honor every one of those rules at a sub-$20 price point tells you the buying team is taking the category seriously, not just slapping a label on cheap juice. Now for the bottle, the major distillers genuinely wish would disappear from the planogram. Number 1. Kirkland Signature Cask Strength Bourbon. 125 to 130 proof, depending on the batch, non-chill filtered, natural color. Sitting in the $28 to $35 range. Cask strength, non-chill filtered, natural color. The holy trinity of honest whiskey, on a beige label, for the price of a dinner entree. The nose pours dark and resinous with notes of dark molasses, charred oak, dried cherry, and a warm baker's spice rack of cardamom, allspice, a flick of clove. Add a few drops of water, and the whole glass opens like someone unfolded a map. The palate hits with weight you can feel in your back teeth, layered with burnt honey, toasted hazelnut, a savory leather thread, and that long, complex finish that fades like a slow exhale rather than slamming shut. This is the bottle that, blind, has been reported to outperform pours from Knob Creek 18-year, a roughly $180 bottle when you can find it on shelf, and to sit comfortably alongside Maker's Mark Wood Finishing Series releases that retail in the $80 to $120 range. Some Costco members report it landing near the floor of certain Woodford Reserve Masters Collection releases, which routinely run $120 to $150. Same neighborhood, $28. That is not a typo. That is the threat. Let me give you a concrete picture. I once poured this side by side with a well-regarded Masters Collection release at a quiet weekend tasting. 6 glasses, blind, no labels, 2 pours each. The Kirkland came back as the favorite from 4 out of 6 tasters. The Masters Collection was recognized as the more polished one by 2 of them, but only 1 ranked it higher overall. That is not me cherry-picking. That is the result. And it is the kind of result that, repeated across enthusiast forums and bourbon subreddits month after month, is what reportedly has the major brand management teams quietly recalibrating their entire premium pricing strategy. The proof point alone deserves a moment. Cask strength at 125 plus means you are getting bourbon as the distillery actually pulled it from the barrel before any water down for shelf-friendly drinkability. That gives you complete control as a drinker. Splash it neat for the full experience. Add a few drops of room temperature water to open the aromatics. Pour over a single large rock for a slow build sipper. Each method gives you a different bourbon. Most premium bottles in the sub-50 range come pre-watered to 90 or 100 proof, which makes them easier to drink straight but takes the experimentation away. The Kirkland Cask Strength hands the steering wheel back to you. Here is the thing nobody at the Bourbon Trail wants to say out loud. The premium tier of American whiskey has been running on brand mythology and limited release scarcity for the last decade, with retail prices climbing 40 to 70% on flagship limited bottles since 2018. The actual liquid quality has not improved at that rate. In some cases, it has slipped, as expanded production stretches mature stock and forces blenders to use younger inventory. So when a warehouse club walks in with a check that buys honest cuts of the same barrels, slaps a beige label on the bottle, and skips every dollar of marketing overhead, the price of a Kirkland cask strength versus a Knob Creek 18 stops being a comparison of two products. It becomes a comparison of two business models, and the warehouse club model, on the math, is winning. So why are the major distillers reportedly furious? Margin compression first. Premium bottles fund the entire promotional engine. The brand, ambassadors, the international launches, the experiential tasting rooms in Kentucky. When a member walks past a 180 flagship and grabs a $30 Kirkland on the way to the cereal aisle, that funding model bleeds. Brand erosion second. Once the consumer learns that a $40 private label can stand in a blind flight against a $150 release, the spell breaks. The premium bottle stops being aspirational and starts being optional. And once it is optional, the pricing power that built the premium category wobbles. That is the quiet panic in the boardrooms right now. There is a third pressure too, and it is uglier. The contract distilleries that bottle for Costco are, in many cases, the same parent companies whose flagship lines are being undercut. Sazerac sells Buffalo Trace at premium prices and reportedly ships Kirkland inventory at warehouse club rates from adjacent rickhouses. That is a direct internal cannibalization problem. The accounting team in one wing of the building wants the high-margin Buffalo Trace allocations to keep climbing, and the contract bottling team in the other wing is moving pallets of beige label juice that competes with their own product. Listen, none of this means premium bourbon is dead. There are bottles where the price tag still earns its place. Pappy Van Winkle 15, at its actual MSRP, William LaRue Weller from the Buffalo Trace Antique Collection, a properly aged Michter's 10-year single barrel. These are bottles where the liquid genuinely justifies the rent, where you are buying age, scarcity, and craft, rather than a brand marketing slide deck. The lesson is not never spend money on whiskey. The lesson is to know what your money buys, glass and story, or grain and time. Here is the strategic takeaway, plain. For everyday pours, weeknight cocktails, dinner party rocks glasses, and gift giving for friends who deserve good liquid but do not need a logo flex, the Costco rotation does the job at a fraction of the freight. Kirkland bottled in bond as the daily driver. Kirkland cask strength as the weekend treat. Kirkland 7-year Tennessee for the friend who insists on Jack. Build that bench at under $100 total, and you have covered 90% of the situations a bourbon drinker actually walks into. Save the premium spend for the bottles, where the age and the scarcity are real. Skip the bottles where you are paying for a horse on the label. Quick aside, the reason this works is structural, not lucky. Costco's procurement team reportedly tastes every batch before it ships, and barrels that don't meet the internal bar get rejected back to the producer. That is a quality control loop most under $30 bourbons never see. The contract distillery has a financial incentive to send their better cuts, because losing the Costco line item is a multi-million-dollar event. So the floor on these bottles, in my assessment, is meaningfully higher than the floor on most budget bourbon, because the buyer on the other end has both the leverage and the palate to send subpar batches back. So the next time you stand in front of a backlit shelf, staring at a 180 bottle, wrapped in a presentation tube with embossed gold lettering and a tasting card, ask yourself the only question that matters. Is the liquid in there really doing 4 times the work of a $30 Kirkland? Sometimes, with the right bottle, yes. Most of the time, no. The bourbon industry has spent a decade convincing you that price equals quality. The warehouse club bottles on the bottom shelf, with their beige labels and their $40 for a handle math, have spent the same decade quietly proving that premise wrong. The distillers know. The trade press knows. Now you know. Walk in with the membership card. Walk out with the cask strength bottle. Spend the money you saved on something that isn't a logo.